Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Super Feeler podcast. My name is Lori, and I'm very excited today to be joined by a friend who I've actually met in person now in Boston, Rita Brown from Australia. So I know our Australian listeners are going to be extra excited because when I spoke about the ISS, the International Society of the Study of Personality Disorders conference I went to, and I spoke about Rita and the award she won, people were like, I need to follow her work. So now we get to hear all about it. So, Rita, you have been in the BPD advocacy space for quite a while now. What brought you into this world?
Okay. Hi Laurie, and hi everybody else. We have a tradition in Australia, if it's okay, at the start of the meeting, we traditionally acknowledge the First Nations people from
Yes,
the
please do.
lands that we're meeting on. And I'm speaking to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, which is the area around Naarm, or as most people probably know as Melbourne in Victoria. And I'd like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging.
Thank you,
And I'd
Rita. That's
also like
beautiful.
to say that I use the pronouns she, her. So how did I get into this space? And look, it's just a space that I think that life's events have taken me on.
Yeah, most of
So,
us are here for that reason. Yeah.
so look, in hindsight, my caring journey started long before I stepped into an advocacy role. As a single child, I, in hindsight, probably took on a caring role for my mother, who had experienced significant trauma herself during her childhood. However, my primary experience as a carer was most profoundly shaped by supporting my daughter. She was given multiple diagnoses. However, the one that seemed to explain her experiences best was borderline personality disorder, or BPD. Self-harm, suicidal thinking and hospitalizations became our way of life for many years. And like so many families, we fell through the gaps in the system, deemed to be too complex for usual mental health care, whatever it is, yet not bad enough to access treatment from Spectrum, which is the statewide service that specialises in personality disorder and complex trauma in Victoria. So I was fortunate enough to find a carer support group, and through that group I heard of an advisory group that had been established with the aim of changing the prevailing negative culture to one of hope and optimism. This led down the track to the formation of the Australian BPD Foundation, which was formally launched in 2013, and I've stayed involved in the organisation and became president in 2018.
Oh my goodness.
Separately, in 2016, I was encouraged to apply for a newly created role of carer consultant at Spectrum, which I mentioned earlier, where we had been refused access to treatment for quite some time. My daughter was finally able to access treatment, and that was certainly, life-changing.
Hmm.
So I started work as a carer consultant, been there 10 years now, and 2 years ago I was promoted to the role of Associate Director of Lived Experience Workforce and Advocacy, which is very much in line with the recommendations of a Royal Commission that the Victorian Health Department had into mental health. And one of that recommendation was that lived experience would be involved at all levels of an organisational structure. Over the years, it's taken a lot of persistence to breaking down some of the barriers. However, I now feel that I'm truly regarded as an equal with clinicians, with the last of the barriers disappearing last year.
Hmm.
So my work in that space was very much around supporting carers, developing and leading single session workshops, which has been researched and published, and advocating for lived experience inclusion to be the norm, not an add-on tick the box exercise.
Hmm.
So I think that I'm really fortunate that I'm able to bring to Spectrum the broader lived experience that I have through my own lived experience and working with through the foundation. And from Spectrum, the experience and the expertise gained from working in a very clinical service, knowing the jargon and being able to meet and speak with so many diverse people.
So two questions about Spectrum really quickly, just so we're all on the same page. So you said your daughter initially wasn't able to access care from Spectrum because her condition wasn't severe enough. Is that right?
Well, that's one of the challenges. Spectrum is a statewide service for the
Right.
state of Victoria.
So they run the state, or sorry, it's run by the state of Victoria, like
Yes,
publicly
it's
funded. Yeah. Okay.
run by the health department.
Gotcha.
However, it's an extremely small service,
Mm,
and its primary role is to be supporting our area mental health services, which are the mental health services run by the public hospitals. And one of the requirements was that you needed to have what we call case management. So Spectrum doesn't actually offer crisis care per se. That is managed by the mental health service. Spectrum much more supports the clinicians to be supporting the person and also offers treatment to a very small number who are at high level of needs for themselves or a high level of needs for themselves and maybe of risk to others.
right.
So
I think that's part of the problem with BPD. Accessing treatment as BPD. It's either you're not sick enough or you're too sick.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. And then for Spectrum, is that like your role there? Is that like a employment role, a volunteer role?
No, that's an employment role. I work
Amazing.
3 days a week.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. That's a lot. No wonder you're tired. I know we were talking earlier about how exhausting this advocacy world can be, and that's a lot of time.
Yep.
Wow. So anyway, sorry, continue. So you're working with Spectrum and yeah, go ahead.
And the foundation. So I guess, look, one thing I guess I should clarify, I appreciate particularly working through ISSPD, and you mentioned that earlier, Laurie, and we're both on the Lived Experience Advisory Committee, that there's different language used in different countries. So in Australia, there is a lot of discussion around how to describe a person who utilises mental health services. Consumers seems to be the term that is most broadly accepted. Some places use service users, some places use clients. I struggle a little bit with clients because a person often isn't actually a client, but they are still needing to be able to access services. The term carers, and I've used that and I identify with one. I personally prefer for services to identify me as being mum.
Right.
But that
more personal.
Yeah, that generic term, because that's what I am. I'm not really. I'm doing what I feel that a loving mum does for their child. It's not really, it's just what you do. So using the term carer here very much as that biological and family of choice, which can include your friends. It could be your community, particularly if you live in say an LGBTIQ plus community, and also for First Nations people, their kin, because they don't identify carers, and a number of other cultures in Australia don't actually identify with the term carers.
Yeah, it's so interesting because in Canada, I would argue like never / very, very infrequently would use the word consumer. Like I haven't heard that at all here. We use patient and client. Patient is a bit out of favor these days. Client is more definitely probably the most prominent. Service user we don't really use. I don't know why. I don't particularly have an opinion on that, other than it's just wordy. Sometimes things just get wordy, right? Lived and living experience, service user, blah, blah, blah. I would say for the carer role, we don't really use that at all either. I mean, obviously, I know from speaking with you so often at the ISSPD meetings that carer is really commonly used, but we would use more family member, loved one, maybe support person. Like it's a bit less specific, kind of like you said earlier, like mom. It's not like family member can be broad, which I like, right? Because to me, my family, yes, I have biological family, but I also have an incredible chosen family that is really important to me. But yeah, carer and consumer, very much not language that we use up here. So
See, I know loved one is used frequently. I personally struggle a little bit with the term loved one. Certainly in my role with Spectrum, I've supported a lot of people who are trying to stay in a relationship with
right.
an ex-partner, mainly because there's young children, and to me it's quite demeaning to be referring to them as the loved one in that particular circumstance. Loved one also to me implies that there is a relationship.
Yeah.
And my daughter and my relationship, unfortunately, was at the stage for some time that there pretty well was none.
Yeah, that's a really good point about loved one. I appreciate that a lot because I think in a lot of complex mental health issues, those relationships are not always super loving or one-way loving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that didn't mean that I didn't love my daughter, but
totally.
to have that relationship described as being a loved one, yes, just doesn't sit comfortably.
Yeah, that's so fair. And I mean, there's also so many different ways that we identify BPD and struggles around language there. So while we're talking about language, I'd be curious, borderline personality disorder, intense emotion or emotion regulation challenges, emotionally unstable personality disorder, right? Like there's so much language discussion out there. What are your thoughts on labels?
Oh, it's a really good question.
It's a hard one.
And look, it's really sensitive
because
it can create a lot of very high emotions around the name. Look, I personally think that the term borderline personality disorder is a horrible name, and I don't particularly like it. However, there's a couple of ways, in my opinion, of approaching it, and we can change the name. And I really suspect that any stigma that's currently attached to BPD will transfer to that new name because it's the relational challenges, the interpersonal difficulties, the fact that services really don't know how to be supporting a person that's, experiencing this set of, behaviors, symptoms that is, to me, is actually creating the stigma. And I think it's really important to be putting across the message that borderline personality disorder is not descriptive.
Yes.
And in no way, or it's purely a label that has been developed by this group of psychiatrists getting on for 90 years ago.
I was going to say a long time, yeah.
It sort of is descriptive of the understanding of mental health at that particular time. However, it's no longer relevant. And there's so much about we shouldn't be saying people have got a borderline, a broken personality. And I just think that that's pulling apart the words in a way that it was never really intended to. Now, I've heard from people that just actually reading those words, that sense of shame, the stigma that person feels themselves, means that they might actually identify that they've got a broken personality. And I'd really encourage people to try and let that go, that this is just a name that's been coined by somebody. And yes, it's not descriptive of who you are and what you're experiencing.
Yeah, I agree. I 100% agree with you around, like, we can change the name of the disorder to blueberry ice cream disorder and the stigma is just going to change, right? It doesn't, or it just move. It's not going to change. It's more about actually building understanding of the disorder from clinicians in particular and society that will help us actually change stigma. and having conversations like this where people with lived experience and their carers are having open conversations about it. That's a huge component of stigma reduction. I also remember when when was this? Probably 12, 15 years ago when I was doing my undergrad in psychology. And I remember them just differentiating the Axis 1 disorders in the DSM as treatable and Axis 2 disorders of the DSM as not treatable. And that, I think, is actually a super flawed way of teaching that. But that was the way that it was taught at the time. Personality disorders are going to be something that are with you forever, and there's nothing you can do about them. And all of the other disorders we have treatment for. And so I think in that way, that's a flawed... BPD should no longer be in that category. But I think that that's more of a flawed way of teaching the difference between Axis 1 and Axis 2 than it is about the fact that borderline personality or personality disorder in general is the problem, right? Because at the end of the day, I have a pretty strong personality. I think there's parts of it that are amazing and beautiful, and that's why this podcast is called Super Feeler, because
Absolutely.
I'm a super feeler.
Yeah.
And I don't think I want that to change. But it is definitely an outside of the norm personality type. Let's just put it that way, regardless of the amount of treatment that I have and continue to go through.
Well, isn't that just part of, the variance of life? I'll describe it as.
Yeah.
Another reason why I'm not really a fan of changing the name, we now have a lot of research around this thing that's called BPD. When you go to a government and ask for money, they will ask, where's the research? Well, here's the research about BPD, but you're asking for something that's called, what do you call Blueberry's disease?
Blueberry dessert disorder or whatever, whatever it is.
So give me the research about the blueberry dessert disorder.
I should have picked a better word. That's very hard to say.
and we'll reconsider. So we've got this evidence base. Let's utilise that evidence base that we're developing. We now know that BPD is treatable. 30 years ago, someone with the symptoms of BPD would basically be told, go home and live life the best you can. At least, now there is some treatable. Sure, it can be hard to access, and I know it's hard to access for many, but we've got this evidence base. We're getting some great advocates that I've had the opportunity to meet, among them you, Laurie, that are giving the message that this is treatable. Let's build on that and develop the understanding that this is a person that's really struggling and needs support.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think we're so aligned in our thoughts on the diagnosis and our label, at least, of the diagnosis, because it's such a funny one because everybody has such a strong opinion, and sometimes my opinion is totally different than others. And I always love to have those conversations because I think every perspective is really interesting. But we're really aligned there for sure.
Yeah.
And now so go ahead.
I do like the way that the ICD-11, the International Classification Diseases, has got a much more dimensional way of diagnosing personality disorders. And I think that, I think probably down the track that term personality disorder will vanish. But it has to be, in my opinion, a process where everyone is brought along for the journey. Not a group of
PhD
senior
clinicians.
People saying we're now going to be calling it something else. Because for people who have lived with BPD, had treatment, feel that they're recovered or living life well, whatever that means for them, with this diagnosis, to suddenly say, no, it's not BPD, it's something else, I don't know how that would sit. I think it would be really challenging.
Yeah, totally. Many of us have built a core understanding of ourselves and found community around the concept of having a personality disorder or BPD. And again, though, I do think in some ways you change the name to ice cream dessert disorder or whatever, blueberry dessert disorder, whatever it was, and you can build that community around this new label. It's not about the label, it's about who you are and what you're interested in and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's so fascinating. So you talked a little bit there about funding and you run a nonprofit. I'm assuming BPD Foundation of Australia is a nonprofit.
It is.
So yes, that's why your brain goes to funding basically immediately, I'm sure. So can you tell us a little bit about the BPD Foundation of Australia?
Sure. So, yeah, you mentioned that it's a not-for-profit. So we're registered with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission that regulates charities. We're lived experience led, and everything we do is done by a small group of volunteers. So we don't have any staff. And our vision is that people living with personality BPD, personality difficulties and complex trauma can access appropriate evidence-based treatment and support and be embraced with hope and optimism throughout their recovery journey. So it's really important to us to encourage an open dialogue between people with lived experience of BPD, carers, clinicians and researchers, because we feel by listening to and learning from one another, we can create meaningful change. So it's a little bit different to a lot of lived experience organisations, which are really just focused on the lived experience. We are genuinely trying to bring together multiple perspectives. And, one of the experiences that I really had many years ago was that it was me versus my daughter at times and me versus the clinicians as well.
Yeah.
Whereas ideally we want the same thing. So let's actually work together so that we can create, a better space.
Mm-hmm. When you and your daughter's relationship was like a bit challenging, I'm
Yep.
sure it's been challenging for a long time, but when the points where you didn't really have that like kind of mutual relationship, were you still involved in her care? And did you feel very blocked out from clinicians? Do you have any advice for people that experience that? Because I know so many family members who are in that situation and are at a complete loss.
Look, I personally feel that the best way is to be learning about BPD, why the person's thinking, feeling, potentially behaving the way that they are, and to develop an understanding and to learn of ways that you can actually be approaching clinicians. In Victoria, we have the Carer Recognition Act, which gives carers certain rights, and that is, for example, a right to be involved in particular spaces of the person's care. For example, on discharge, so someone shouldn't be discharged. This is what we experience, and basically get rung at say 2:00 in the morning and say your daughter's ready to come home, and there would be absolutely no handover.
How old was your daughter when she was diagnosed?
Look, the first self-harm suicide was at the age of 15.
Okay. Yeah, so quite young.
And at 15, and this is really painful, is that she did manage to get into a public mental health service for a bit, saw a clinician, we swapped schools, and things really seemed to be changing. And I was just told, I wasn't involved in any of this, I was called into an appointment one time, we've decided that she doesn't need to see me anymore. And I was pretty upset by that, because I just felt that things had improved, but they certainly weren't what I would regard as right, and not in a space that I felt really confident to be picking up everything.
Well, and I know for me, when I was a kid, I presented relatively well outside of the home. And so, which was to my own detriment at the end of the day, but obviously I was a child, so I didn't know that. But I would, my mom in particular would be like, no, things are really bad. And then people would say like, no, they're not that bad. Look, she's doing fine in school and she's whatever. And it was not a good situation because you can
Sounds
present
familiar.
differently across different places. And
Yeah.
so it sounds like that might have been a little bit of the case there, as they were like, yeah, she's fine. And you're like, no, she's definitely not.
So I think learning the language that clinicians will listen to, which means that you, in my opinion, need to be in a, shall I say, a fairly analytical space, because if you become too emotional, they tend not to listen. But if you learn the language that they will listen to, in that, she's really not coping at the moment. I'm noticing this. For example, her self-care. She's letting go of her self-care. Or I notice that she's crying in her room at night. If you pick up a couple of, and just phrase that in a fairly, I hate to say it, non-emotive, factual way, I think the clinicians are more likely to be listening to you. I think there's a sense of clinicians, and I think it's changing, actually, to become involved in that dynamic between a carer and the person. And I think there's a lot of education that's needed for clinicians to actually realise that with support and education, carers can become therapeutic allies in the treatment.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, for sure. Have you seen some examples in either your life or the others that you work with and support where somebody has moved from a space of clinicians not supporting their involvement in care and then becoming that huge ally and as part of the care team in a way?
And yes, that's our experience. So from my daughter having a number of psychiatrists and psychologists, she started seeing and having this brick wall. And some fairly horrific meetings where I would be asked by the psychiatrist, why do you think your daughter's like this? And, that's a really difficult question to answer. So, yeah, she started seeing a new psychiatrist, and within 3 months, he had her permission for him to see me by myself.
Oh, wow.
And he is of the stance, and he comes from that stance all the time. I can understand you don't want your carers to be involved now, but this is something that I'm really going to be working towards.
Mm-hmm.
So his default position is to be including carers rather than excluding and only bringing them on later, but to try and include them from the beginning of treatment. And he also believes that once he's got carers fully involved and embraced and with the psychoeducation and some skills, that actually a whole lot of his work is done.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in these circumstances where a lot of the time it is trauma across the board. And I mean, especially you're a little bit older than my parents by just a couple of years. These aren't things that my parents talked about when they were growing up at
Absolutely
all.
not. Yeah.
And so it's very difficult for, my dad, for example, who grew up in a military United States of America family, to be talking about emotions and trauma on a regular basis. And so I think it became very much my experience forced my family to be able to have more conversations about this and for the better. But how do you bring somebody in who has never talked about it before without providing the carer that education and support? Because it's hard for them too. It's not easy.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I can acknowledge that my way of responding to my daughter at times was really unhelpful for her, and I wasn't, I was really just surviving. I was trying to do the best that I could, and to be dismissed by a clinician, "Oh, you're part of the problem," really isn't at all helpful, because I need some support. I need some understanding. I need some acknowledgement that I'm actually hurting too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And there's so much mom blame when it comes to BPD,
Yeah,
specifically mom blame.
yeah.
Um, do you see that quite a bit in to this day in the carer space?
I think that has considerably changed over the years. Yeah, I
For the
th-
better, I assume.
yeah, for the better. There's been a couple of really powerful advocates in both the consumer and the carer space, and I think there is a much greater recognition of the interpersonal nature of, I'll say, mental health conditions, but in particular that BPD is such a relational condition and tends to be most evident in your closer relationships.
Mm-hmm. And was your daughter's dad around?
So we separated when she was 2.
Oh, okay.
He he was around, but certainly not very consistent.
Yes, well, and you're obviously very involved in this work, so I can imagine like there's usually even if they are, around consistently, there's usually one parent who's kind of the more present for these kinds of things than
Yeah.
others.
He did unfortunately pass away
Mm,
fairly early on in her mental wellness journey.
okay. Yeah, which probably also impacts, right? Like that's also trauma for everyone.
Well, you consider that that sense of abandonment
Abandonment.
and
Yes.
the loss of a relationship that you hope to have. Yes.
For sure. So, sorry, I feel like I detracted us from a bit when we were talking about the BPD Foundation. So, what kind of support do you provide? Is it advocacy? Is it peer support?
So look, we're not actually providing any specific services at the moment. We are looking at actually changing that, and we may do something along that line. So most of our work is around national awareness initiatives. So that includes that we coordinate BPD Awareness Week, which is a national campaign, largely via social media, and we're trying to run events in many states. We also aim to run a national conference where we aim to balance the participation of consumers, carers, clinicians, and continue to work to increase that open dialogue and move away from the stigma and towards understanding and hope. We run educational webinars. We were fortunate and got some funding many years ago to roll out a national training strategy. And the aim of that was to upskill and engage multidisciplinary clinicians and service providers and increase their capacity to recognise, respond to, and treat people living with BPD, and also to provide better support for their families and carers. So the family carer was very important. So part of that was developing a specific curriculum. We ran a series of webinars, and look, I think we've had close to 20,000 people attend those
Wow.
webinars. We ran with Project Air Strategy, which is a New South Wales-based organisation, e-learning modules online, and I think we've had about 500 people complete that. That is in need of a serious revision. And we've also ran in-person workshops around Australia. So that was small, intensive workshops, 2-day workshops for 25 clinicians. And the aim of the curriculum that was developed was pulling together the key factors of what works from the main therapies like DBT,
Hmm.
dialectical behavior therapy, mentalization-based therapy, good psychiatric management from the state, schema and transference, and bring it into something that basically every clinician could do so that every interaction the person had, whether it's in a therapy space or in a waiting area, would be supportive of the person with BPD.
That's incredible. Is that curriculum shareable at all?
That's something that
Because
we're
we need
working
that in
on.
Canada.
We're working on the IP at the moment. I mean, as part of all this, you get involved in lots of things that you didn't think you would become involved with, and intellectual property is one of them, which drives me nuts.
Yeah, I know, me too. It's so frustrating, but truly, is that through Project Air, that curriculum?
No, that's
okay.
we
it's all
partner
different
with
things.
Spectrum.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Spectrum. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we should see once you've got all that IP stuff figured out, because that should be scaled for sure.
Yeah. Well, we're still trying to scale it in in Australia.
Mm-hmm. And is the uptake good?
Look, the uptake was great, but the project's finished. The funding's run out, and we can't get ongoing funding.
Yeah, that seems to be the case for a lot of places. Well, I know for a fact that there's somebody listening to this podcast right now in New South Wales. So Shannon, I know you're listening. You listen every time. And I'm curious, for people like her, who's an incredible BPD advocate. I mean, there's many listeners in Australia. How do they get involved with your work? Can they get involved with your work?
Sure. So look, we haven't had the capacity to really develop I'll call it a volunteer bank yet. And it's been a little bit ad hoc as to how much we can support volunteers. We've mainly been asking people to contact their local politicians, because politicians will listen to their local constituents.
Yeah.
And Canada's a fairly big country too, but we're a fairly large country. So if we can get people to speak to their local members, that really helps to spread the message. As far as we're usually trying to get content to inform our BPD Awareness Week, say to be running events in their local area, just, a small gathering, to be spreading our messages, our social media, and also to be acting as attending our conferences, maybe being speakers, being part of webinars. So there are various things that people can do to be supporting us.
Amazing. Well, I'm sure you'll have at least one person reach out after this episode, probably more, because it's such important work. And I'll make sure that I link everything in the show notes about how to get involved and to look up Project Air Spectrum and the BPD Foundation.
Yeah.
So how involved are you with Project Air?
Not very involved with Project Air. Certainly, I think that the foundation and Project Air have got a good relationship, but and we support Project Air, and Project Air supports us when we have a conference. But we're
separate entities.
We're separate entities. There's some challenges, and not just with Project Air, but for organisations that are particularly government funded. They don't want to speak out against the government in any shape or form, because it may be risking their own funding. Project Air is very New South Wales centric, whereas we are much more national.
Right. Yeah. It's hard, because to be an advocate, you have to be able to kind of find this line of not stabbing yourself in the foot and being able to speak the truth. And it's a hard place to be, especially if you rely on funding, then you have to tread carefully but speak the truth, which is an interesting place to be.
Yeah. I did want to say too that we held a conference last year. We held it in Melbourne, and we had a representative, so Bryn Grenier from Project Air came, someone from BPD Collaborative, which is statewide service in South Australia, someone from our youth mental health service called Origin attended, myself and Spectrum attended, and we had a couple of panels, and on the panel that the 4 leaders and myself were on, it was really interesting that basically we've all got the same we've got different ways of getting to the same goal, so that there was much more sense of collaboration than being separate. So one thing that I'm really trying to work on at the moment is to build on that sense of cooperation, so that we're not as I think we're stronger when we're working together.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, yeah, is hard. And I don't know specifically about your context, but I know hard just in A, the nonprofit space, and B, sometimes the advocacy space, because people get competitive.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, they need to get competitive.
Yeah.
Because there's only a small amount of dollars.
Yeah. It's so frustrating. I'm always like, can't we just all play nice in the sandbox? But at the end of the day, I get it. Like it is, even though we all have the same goal, people naturally try and, yeah, I mean, you have to kind of fight for what's yours, I guess, at the end of the day. But it's hard.
Yeah.
It makes the advocacy space and the nonprofit space very as not as collaborative as it should be for maximal benefit, in my opinion.
And I do think, unfortunately, it's an additional challenge in that we're fairly specifically focused on, personality disorder, whereas a lot of organisations are much more looking at just general mental health. But I feel in doing that, they're actually missing out on some of the real challenges that surround this diagnosis that's called personality disorder.
I've been involved in a few organizations where it's gone from a BPD specific organization, and then there's a desire from certain members of boards and certain leaders of the organization to expand to broad mental health because it's, in theory, easier to get funding for. And I'm always the person who's pushing back on that because I think that's why we get lost. And there's so much value. We cannot pretend that BPD and anxiety are the same thing. It's not possible. And the minute we start to do that, we're both not giving people with anxiety the support they need, but we're also really downplaying the impacts both to ourselves and others, and the cost to society, which is very high, that people with BPD who are untreated are going through and contributing, right? And it's hard because you want to, I understand the logic of being like, but everybody will fund it if it's depression and anxiety. And it's like, right, but that's not why we're here. And so if anybody's asking me to be on their board, just so you know, if that conversation ever comes up, my opinion has yet to change, but it's tough.
Absolutely. Yeah. If I can go back to what the foundation is doing,
sorry.
how we do. Yeah. We sort of digressed here. So in 2019, we developed a national consensus statement by, with and for people impacted by BPD. And this outlines our vision and our call on government and elements in the service system to work together to make our vision a reality. There were 4 key asks, and they were an endorsement of a national model of care so that there's much greater consistency across Australia, a national framework for families and carers, a national training framework for health professionals, and the establishment of a BPD Centre of Excellence or a specialist centre in each state and territory of Australia. I think we can do a whole lot by general advocacy and education. However, I think there's still likely to be some people that are going to fall through the area mental health services are going to find very challenging. So having a statewide service, a centre of excellence that can really be supporting those clients and also developing new models of care, new frameworks, new ways of actually working within that local space, I think is going to create a much better environment for everyone.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing.
So we also have a monthly newsletter which is provided free to our subscribers and to our members. And members is free, so people are welcome to join up. And then we also participate in a lot of consultations around all sorts of things. I did a couple of submissions to the Royal Commission in Victoria, a productivity commission. So just pushing for policy reform and better mental health system responses. As well, I try and do a lot of advocacy to politicians and services, and I've actually got a couple coming up later this month. So it's really being that squeaky wheel and trying to get some traction.
Well, I appreciate you being a squeaky wheel. And so how long have you been in this at BPD advocacy space as a carer?
Look, I first became involved in the family support group in 2005, so many years ago now.
21 years? Oh my gosh.
And I gradually I became co-facilitator of that group, and then became foundation it's actually 2011. I became involved in the advisory group, and then 2013 foundation, 2016 with Spectrum. It's been from very small beginnings, so to speak. It's just grown.
Yeah, wow. So over the 21 years, I guess, that you've been involved in this, what gives you hope about things that have changed over that time?
Well, good question. And I really try and hold on to the hope, because sometimes I get so frustrated by all the knockbacks. But look, I really think that the conversation has shifted. It mightn't feel like that for the people out there that are really struggling at the moment, but in the conversations that I hear, there is a greater recognition of, shall I say, the person, and the dominant narrative seems to have shifted much more from being deficit focused to being trauma informed, and focusing on the person's strengths and what they can do. And the work, rather than working to and doing to, working with, and actually working with the person to find out what's helpful for them. I think there is a really, 30 years ago, there was absolutely no treatment for BPD, whereas now we know that treatment works. People can and do recover. There's some really powerful advocates that are speaking out and are living proof that treatment does work, and that this is a group of people that are really struggling and should be condemned. I think there is a growing recognition, I'm not too sure about Canada, about the role that carers can play as a therapeutic ally. And whilst I certainly need to acknowledge that some people with BPD have certainly experienced trauma from carers, the carers that I largely work with are really largely trying to understand and are really struggling, and just, to be giving them some hope and some information helps them to be in a much more supportive relationship with the person. I'm really encouraged by the increased visibility and leadership of people with lived experience. Not just in sharing the stories, but in shaping services, in shaping policy and research and education. That shift from being spoken about to being listened to feels really significant for me. And I think that in an organisation like ISSPD, which is very much extremely experienced, highly regarded clinicians, to actually have lived experience advisory committee, lived experience people on the board, and a greater involvement of lived experience in the Congress, it is just such a huge step forward. The first
and what I loved just really quickly, what I loved at the ISSPD Congress is that so many of the researchers were sharing about their own lived experience.
Absolutely.
And that gave me a lot of hope, because I don't think you would have seen that many years ago.
Well, the first ISSPD I attended was in Melbourne in 2011. I think it was 2011. I would not have seen in 2011 what I saw at the Congress last year. So And change, unfortunately, happens slowly, but it's a significant shift.
As long as
Yeah.
it's happening, right?
Yeah.
As long as we're actually getting somewhere, because this is an exhausting
Yeah.
battle.
Yeah.
Exhausting. I'm so tired, and I've only been doing this 10 years. I can't imagine having done it 21 years. And I don't plan on stopping anytime soon, don't get me wrong, but it's a tiring battle, and it's a worthwhile battle, but it's nice to see tangible wins like that, because there are years where I don't see tangible wins, and I go,
Yeah.
oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah. Absolutely. So look, it's slow and steady. And, I would love for people that are listening to actually acknowledge that, yes, they may be struggling themselves, but there are lots of advocates that are really working very hard. And it's not just lived experience advocates. I also know of clinicians and researchers that are doing great stuff in this advocacy space. And it's hard yakka.
Yes. Yeah, it's mostly unpaid, relentless, just being that squeaky wheel and doing it because you know it's right. And yeah.
Well, you're
exhausting.
talking to me on a Saturday night, and I'm talking to you on a Sunday midday.
Actually,
this is our
it's
time.
actually Saturday night for me too.
No, it's Sunday midday for me.
Oh, fun! Oh, Sunday. Oh, yes, sir. I see what you're saying. Yes, yeah. Sunday midday. I know. I spend most of my weekends doing something about BPD, and then my full-time job is in the mental health field. So I'm like, does it ever? People are like, what do you do for fun? I'm like, I don't know. I have a great time doing this, but I don't know if this is what most people would consider fun, right?
I think it's the passion that drives us.
It
the
is.
Passion and the knowledge that this is something that's worthwhile.
It is. And we've both had our lives fundamentally changed in various ways by BPD, and the stigma that we've experienced and the barriers in the systems that we've experienced. And I mean, I know that both of us, even if we impact one person, and I know we've both impacted more than one person, then that's worth it. It's just reminding ourselves that those impacts are there. And it's always nice to hear that there's change. So,
Another thing that I think has changed, and I think it's a little bit for mental health in general, in that I was actually refused permission to leave work. This wasn't in the mental health space when my daughter was in sick bay at school and they wanted me to pick her up, and I wasn't allowed to go and pick her up. I would also be denied coming to work late because my daughter was currently in the emergency department, and we've had an incident overnight, often a Sunday night, Monday morning. I'm trying to ring up the boss and say, can I come in late? The ED doctor wants to see me. And I was basically told that unless I became more reliable, they would have to let me go.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I feel like that has changed quite a bit, because I know, at least in most of the places I've worked at, if your kid is sick, you do what you got to do.
Yeah. And as a single mum, I couldn't let that work go. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, but you also can't let your daughter go. So what kind of work did you do at the time?
I was in pharmacy.
Right. So you could have not gone. You could have been late. It would have been okay.
Not really, because we have the requirement that a pharmacist has to be on duty for the pharmacy to be open. So it required my boss to be coming in instead of me to open up. So
okay.
I can understand the difficulty, but that puts me in a spot that was really difficult.
Yes, very much so. So you were a pharmacist.
Yeah.
Or are a pharmacist.
Well, I've let that registration go now.
Right. Well, you must know all about all of the psych drugs then.
This is 15 years ago since I last worked in pharmacy.
Well, it's funny because I would say they've changed, but they really haven't. Most of them are the same. They're very old drugs now. It's funny. But probably the ones they prescribe are slightly different. So just we're coming up on time here, and I just want to ask my last question, because I think, again, I love to start and end on positives, is what do you love most about people with borderline personality disorder?
Goodness. Yeah. So I think what I love most, and I think why I probably have the passion for this space, is the depth of feeling, of connection, of care. Emotions are often experienced with an intensity that's, often painful. But the same intensity also shows up as extraordinary empathy, loyalty, and attunement to others. And I just think that is is such a valuable way of being. They seem to have depending on their own level of wellness, I guess at the time, but they've really seem to have an intuition for shifts of mood. That sense of safety long before others do. I also really deeply admire the courage it takes to keep on showing up in a world that has so often misunderstood, dismissed, or harmed them.
Mm-hmm.
I find, I guess, being fortunate enough to work in a space now that we've got two lived experience consumers and another carer at Spectrum working. It's just they're incredibly reflective and values driven, and they're really committed to growth. And there's a creativity and an honesty and emotional intelligence that seems to, I don't know, comes from surviving a lot and still wanting to connect. So that sense of humanity, that is certainly something I saw in my daughter. The sense of concern, say for the plight of the First Nations people, for the various conflicts that are around the globe, where community groups that are marginalised. There's just such a huge level of warmth and empathy. And I just feel really extremely honoured to meet some fantastic people in this space who are so passionate and work so hard to support others experiencing such challenging circumstances, and ideally make this a space where people don't have to experience the same challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yourself included. Thank you so much, Rita. That was beautifully said. And it's been such a pleasure getting to chat more. I know we met in Boston, but it's one of those things where at conferences, everybody's running around with their head cut off trying to get to the next session. So it's
Absolutely.
so nice to have time to chat.
No, great to talk to you too. Yep.
Thank you for all you do.
And thanks, Laurie.
Thanks.